to the History Bards podcast today. I'm host Dee Marley, and I'd like to welcome Jan Foster to the show today. She is the historical fantasy author of Disrupting Destiny and Anarchic Destiny,
Anarchic.
as well as the prequels to the series and a selection of children's books. Thank you so much for being on the show today. How are you today?
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm great. Thank you very much.
Good. Well, to our listeners, as a way of introduction, Jan lives in the northwest of England, where she says it rains too much for her liking, and her household is filled with children, dogs, several businesses, and lots of books, where she retreats into her writing world as much as possible. History has always fascinated her, and she revels in being left alone in ruins to ponder the what-ifs. Her passion is the Tudor Age, a rich tapestry of events and people which form the foundation of modern British society. And you know, I read in your bio that you love the idea that there may be something yet undiscovered about the world as we know it. And I would love for you to tell us more about your fascination with this.
Well, as you say, I do adore the Tudor Age. I don't know why. There's something captivating about that time when there was so much discovery and exploration happening. It really fires the imagination, and there's obviously also all the kings and queens in the history that just begs to be delved into, doesn't it? But there was so much more. They believed in things. The esoteric was very real to them, and what we would consider these days to be perhaps folklore or something like that. Magic was very, very real to the Tudors. There were witches. There was just no question about that. It was just what they did with their magic.
Right. So what started your what started your fascination with that? Or has it just always been something you've loved?
I think probably, if I'm brutally honest, it was my parents that child would drag us around all these places and that they enjoyed going to see. Or we're very lucky we have something called the National Trust, and I probably have been to at least 20% of the national properties. As well, that kind of didn't really hit me that much, but I must have enjoyed. I liked history in school, but then as I grew up and became an adult, kind of just didn't really hit me as much. And then when I had children, started to go back and see these places again. I wanted to take my children there to experience them. I don't know why, but in going back as an adult, it's made me realize just how much I love them and how much I love history and learning all about the past. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized the real reason why we learn history in school is to understand our present based on what we know of the past. And that's always changing, isn't it? History,
it is.
The historians are always making new discoveries, and that again just influences our opinion. And we look on today's society and think, well, is that how that came about? And obviously the Tudor Age in particular, there's so many phrases in our language which come from the much lauded
from
William Shakespeare and times like that. Yeah, exactly, that we still use today. So I find it interesting to draw the parallels between what was and what is.
No, that's really fascinating. I totally agree with you. I'm so fascinated as well with all the history in Britain, and I got to a certain point too that I wanted to take my kids. So I completely understand. There's just something about it. It's kind of passed down because my grandmother, she loved that history too, and it just kind of filtered down, passed down to my kids as well. So that's really fun. That's fun to do together.
I keep trying with my children. They're not appreciative. I'm sure I wasn't at the time either, but now,
Yeah, it'll happen. It'll happen. I promise it will, because
I hope so.
Yeah, it will. So let me ask you this. So how did this sort of thinking influence your choice of the genre you wanted to write in?
Well, it all started a long, long time ago. No, in reality, for me, my writing journey started relatively recently. I was a mother. I am a mother, and I had been tinkering with the idea of, when my children were in school, do I go back to work?
Yeah.
I was very fortunate at the time that I say fortunate, but fortunate. My husband was traveling a lot with work, and it wasn't practical really for me to go back to doing a full-time job that I'd been doing before, which
Hmm.
was in business consultancy. So we were looking at the various options for what I could do while the children were in school. And I was doing a lot of work in the school at the time, doing reading with the children, which I love. I love to
Yeah.
kind of encourage that love of reading. It's not just about, putting the letters together. It's about getting them to enjoy books and
Right.
escape into them. So as a part of that, I started writing my children's book, which is Mitch and Mooch Try Swimming. Um, and then while that was in the works with the illustrations, because that takes a long time,
Uh-huh.
I
Yes.
thought, what can I do now? I just, you know what? I've got this idea for a story. I'll just start writing it. And before I knew it, I had a book. I say before I
Oh,
knew it.
wow.
During this point in time, COVID hit. I was locked
Yes.
down schooling. I don't know, and it was my escape to go
Yes.
and like do this to escape into it of an evening and not be thinking about everything else that was going on in the world and how hideous
Hmm.
it was and how I was going to get my daughter to do her maths the next day. It was a pure escapism for me to do the
Right.
writing. So I somehow finished that first book, which was Disrupting Destiny, and thought, yeah, I'm quite enjoying doing this. I quite like just running away into a book, not
Yes.
just reading them, because that's obviously always been there, but
Uh-huh.
actually writing it and having that control that you have as an author. It is a bit like the parent power, isn't it? But it's the author
Yes.
power. I control what my characters do.
Yes.
And I love to research. Yeah, I couldn't help it because of the subject matter.
Right.
I did choose historical fantasy because it meant that I had a really good excuse to do lots of research, which I love.
Yes.
And poke around into things. It's like a rabbit hole, isn't it? You
It
start with one
is.
thing and you end up
It is.
falling into another.
Well,
So
so
yeah,
on
there,
that,
there was the escapism element.
yeah. So on
Cool.
that vein, can you tell us more about the books and the story behind each of the books?
Okay, well, my world, I should just explain, is
Mhm.
it's very much rooted in history. So
Mhm.
it's a cross between, well, it's not a cross between, it's a subset of historical fantasy, which is generally branded magical realism.
Mhm.
So just to give you, if your listeners haven't heard of that term before, if you think about Harry Potter,
Yeah.
they have a whole other society that operates within what we know as the normal society. And I first kind of came across this particular genre or subgenre through a book series called Discovery of Witches.
Mhm.
I don't know if your readers will know of it.
Yeah.
And I just adored it. I just thought that just ticks so many boxes for me. I really,
Right.
really believe that there are people who walk this earth who are not quite human. They're extraordinary, not weird, extraordinary. And the more I thought about this, the more I thought, actually, yes, I can see how through history people were considered witches, and people. The history of vampires in itself is a whole, whole thing. It goes way beyond, way older than Bram Stoker's kind of
Uh-huh.
interpretation of it. It's there've been tales of people drinking blood for many years before that. And then I thought, well, what people believed in fairies as well. Now, how did that come about? And I started thinking about the kind of groups of people that would have been in society who had these extraordinary abilities, who were looked on as something by humans as something different, something extra, something weird, but they still operated within society, hidden.
Right.
So in my world, I have a hidden set of creatures who are witches, vampires, demons, and my main characters are fae. So they look like humans, but they've got wings.
Uh-huh.
Imagine how hard it would be to operate in Tudor society if you have wings,
Yeah.
which is why there don't tend to be
The
many of them.
clothing, yes. Definitely
Yeah,
the
the
clothing.
clothing. So you've got those difficulties of trying to hide who you are, what you're doing.
Right.
And that's really, really brought out a lot more in the new prequel, the latest release, which is Destiny Awaiting.
Okay.
um, where you have Aoife, who is a runaway from the island of Naturae, which is where all the Fae live, well, as far as she knows, all the Fae live. And she runs away into England. And unfortunately, the first thing that happens to her is she interrupts a human thief. Completely naive, very, very innocent, doesn't know what she's doing, doesn't know how to operate in normal society because Fae are totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And first thing she does is gets captured, which is unfortunate for
Uh-huh.
her. And before you know it, she ends up going to war with Henry
Oh.
V's army into
Oh,
Agincourt.
wow.
So yeah.
Oh, and Agincourt. Wow.
So, but you get that contrast of how alien it must see, but also it introduces the reader to how the Tudors, well, the medieval age operated, and
Mm-hmm.
looking at it with that kind of her viewpoint, it must seem, and even now, if you look at what they did, it seems very strange to us in a modern age.
Yeah.
How they worked, how they functioned as a society, what they believed.
Mm-hmm.
You can almost barely imagine it sometimes.
Wow.
So yeah, so
That's
that's my world. So within it, there are witches, vampires, demons, and fae.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds really, really fascinating. So I have to ask you, so throughout because you said you love to read as well, are there any books that have influenced you as a writer?
Well, I think apart from the discovery of witches, I've
Yeah.
tried not to. It sounds weird. I love historical fantasy. I love to read it. I love historical fiction. I love to get lost in those people's worlds, as it were. Uh, but really, I suppose only textbooks. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? Really, but
No, it
books that
doesn't.
I would use as reference materials.
Right,
They
right,
they do influence it because all of my stories start with the history. I
right.
look for particular years in a very short space of time where there's a lot of things happening.
Mm-hmm.
So, Disrupting Destiny happens 1535 to 1537. Anarchic Destiny happens 1553 to 1556, and those are years where an intense period of change
Mm-hmm.
for the ruling people, the kings, the queens, etc., but also for the people on the ground. And a lot of that is bunched together with changes in religion, a change of
Yes,
ruler,
right.
particularly in Henry VIII,
Henry the
Edward's,
Eighth. Yeah.
Mary's case. Yeah, there was a massive change in thought and
Mm-hmm.
activity at those particular points, which has an effect upon my characters. So I never change history.
Mm-hmm.
I just it's viewed through the eyes of the creatures, if that makes any sense.
Yes, absolutely makes
So,
sense. I was just wondering that because I know lots of times, we do have, some of us have those that have influenced us as writers, but then a lot of authors decide completely not to read other stories like that because you don't want it to kind of influence it too much. You know what I'm saying? It's
yeah,
like,
I have a bit of an immersion thing that happens when I'm actually
yes, me
writing a
too.
novel, which is I'll only read books set in that time
Yes,
period. I'll only watch TV series,
yes,
which unfortunately for me is quite narrow because Tudors is quite narrow, really, if you think that's only a
yes,
century.
yes.
But yeah, I do immerse myself, and I will read historical fiction set in that time, but
Okay,
specifically only those time periods, just to kind of I think it just filters in, doesn't it? All the
it
little
does.
nuances and things you might have forgotten to put in terms of detail.
Right.
So, yeah, I try and get that detail to really bring it alive for people and help people to get lost in them and feel
Yeah.
like they're in that world with my characters.
Oh, well, that sounds really fascinating. So I have to ask you, in all of the research that you did you find anything obscure? Or there was something really fascinating that you included in your book?
Oh,
Or maybe you didn't include it. Maybe
all
you
the
just thought it
time.
was,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, well, I have a problem in the sense of the style of writing that you find of the time can actually be off-putting for readers. So
Mhm.
one of the things that we're very lucky these days. We have huge amounts of online resources. The British
Yes.
Library has an online catalogue. I particularly love the medieval soldier database, which I got a little bit rabbit warrened into when I was writing Destiny Awaiting. It's amazing. You can literally type in your name
Yes.
and see if any of your ancestors were there
Oh,
and what they did. And they've got, well, Henry V was remarkably organised. He had
wow.
lists upon lists upon lists, and they've got all of those. They've got online
Oh,
all
that's
of
fascinating.
the requisition records, how much money he paid everybody, down to
Wow.
the penny. It's amazing.
Wow.
So that was quite quite a fun find. My best discovery was that I came across, when I was researching Anarchic Destiny, I came across the diary of a warden at the Tower of London who had been writing that diary while Mary the First was being coronated. So that
Wow.
was amazing, the detail, because he literally
Yes.
described her procession down to what she was
Oh,
wearing. You can't get that kind of detail.
right.
You'd have to watch it on telly, wouldn't you, really?
Yeah.
But it also had in it pretty much verbatim, as far as he could remember, the last words of Lady Jane Grey,
Oh.
as she stood on the scaffolding and she was
Oh, how
about to be
tragic. Yeah.
beheaded. Yeah, so that was amazing. And there was another one, which again is covered in Anarchic Destiny, when there was an uprising, and it was slightly paraphrased, and I had to slightly tweak it to make it easier to read. But the sort of inspiring speech which persuaded an army that was all ready to march on Mary the First,
Mm.
and like march against the rebels, and they all turned coat. They all, this inspiring speech by this leader, basically he said, I completely understand what you're trying to achieve with your march on Mary to persuade her not to marry Philip of Spain.
Mhm.
Uh, and you know what? I think you're right. Everybody, come on, come on, follow me. So they marched the whole army down there to,
Wow.
meet the rebels, and then the head of the army just turned around and went, "Yeah, you got a good point, really. We'll come with you. We'll come with you. Come on, we'll all march back together, shall we?"
Oh, that's really neat. That's
So yeah,
awesome
I
that you
found that.
that's amazing that you found that.
Yeah,
That's really
I
awesome.
felt like I'd hit the jackpot then.
Yes, you
Unfortunately,
did.
I ran it past the beta reader who went, "You're gonna have to change that wording. I can't understand it." Right.
Oh,
Just
wow.
soften it a bit, make it a bit
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah. Well, I know you've had like tons of fun doing your research and everything. I'm a research fanatic too. Whenever I get writing a book, I love doing the research. But we would love to know, and I'm sure the listeners would love to hear maybe a favorite line or passage from your own book. Do you have one that you
Ah,
really like?
uh, I was going to do this. I was going to find one, and I totally and utterly
Oh,
forgot.
that's okay. That's okay. And if you don't, it's completely okay. I can cut this part, that question out, so we can snip it.
Yeah.
So, like going on, I would love to know, since I'm sure that this all was incredibly fascinating and there was moments that you just felt like it was just flowing so easily, but I also know that there had to have been some really difficult parts. Like, what did you find most difficult about writing this book or these books?
Um, I think the problem I often have is that I do all this research and I have an idea for a plot in terms of where the characters start, where they want to go, what the journey is, and I almost always know where they're going to end up. So I start the book having done the research and what historical events are going to trigger what reaction from a character. And then sometimes the characters surprise me.
Yes.
And I go, actually, oh, I thought you were going to react that way, but you are actually no. Now I'm writing it, you're reacting in a completely different way. And it does kind of throw you into a bit of a tiz. And you go, whoa, 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 whoa. I had a whole plot here that I was going to go and I was going to follow, and you're going off
Right.
piste completely on a tangent. What am I going to do now? So sometimes I have to give myself a bit of a stern talking to, and I find
Yeah.
it quite difficult to stand back and go, no, I must actually make them do what I want them to do. Otherwise, I'm going to go completely on tangent.
Yeah.
And again, the problem with that is when you're linking it to certain historical events.
Hmm.
There have been a few times where I thought I was going to include a historical event in something, and I was going to do a scene around it, and it was going to have this impact. And I realized that actually I'm just putting that in just for the sake of having the historical event in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually add to the plot.
Right.
So, in fact, I've just done that. I've literally just done that with the book I'm writing at present, whereas I had them all traveling off from one place to another just because I wanted them to have a trial in Lancaster Castle.
Okay.
Um, and the reason for that was a solid one. It was a solid one because A,
Mhm.
I live fairly near Lancaster, so I can go to the castle and see it and really get that
Right.
feel for it. And B, because one of the my source material is actually a transcript of the court records for the Pendle Witches trial. I don't know if
Mhm.
you've heard of the Pendle
Yes.
Witches, but
Yes, I have.
they but very handily enough, the two judges commissioned the clerk of the court to write essentially a report, pretty much verbatim, for what happened and who said what and how it all evolved, and then do a little bit of a summary of it. And it is pretty much the source we have. It's one of the number one sources we have for what witch trials actually entailed. It's actually set 50 years later on than my book, but
Mhm.
anyway. And I just I forgot where I'm going with this. So I had this whole idea that they were going to go to Lancaster because that was where this particular court case happened. And I thought, actually, you know what? I'm having a journey in there
Hear
that's
more of
completely
Helena's interview in
unnecessary
part 2.
because I've got this source material.
Yeah.
It's, it is still fiction. It is still fiction. What I'm
Yeah.
saying in my book is not actually what happened in that trial at all. It's just using some of the phrasing, the
Right.
terminology, the sequence of events in the court case that can happen in York where they are at the moment. So
Right.
yeah, I
Oh,
kind of felt like that saved me, but also didn't save me, and it was
yeah.
quite
No,
hard to let go
it is.
of
It
that.
is.
But
And that kind of leads in.
it is done now.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into like whenever somebody is starting or thinking about writing historical fiction, that's kind of a good advice about to young authors or those that are starting out in the about not clinging to things so desperately. Sometimes you do have to let go of things. So what else would be your advice to those that are starting out?
The best advice that I was given when I first started out, and I was trying to finish that book one, and you'll forgive my coarseness on this. It was AIS, which stands for Arse in Seat.
Yes, I've heard
Nothing's
that one.
written if you don't sit down and just
Right.
hit the keyboard or dictate it or however you choose to write. But it's a weird mental thing. You actually have to dedicate that time to doing it. You can't
Yes.
really just do it on the fly. It's really hard. I've seen people that say, oh, I wrote a whole novel in notes on my phone, and I'm thinking, God, really? You managed to keep an entire plot line in your head?
Yeah, no.
That's impressive. That's very impressive. But for what this genre demands,
Yes,
there's so much detail that
it
I
is.
certainly could not keep that level of information in my head. I think if you're doing some kind of books, if you're amazingly talented, you could just sit there and dash it off whenever, 5 minutes on the
Right.
bus or whatever. But I personally, I can't. I have to sit down and dedicate that time.
Yes.
AIS. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. It just if you
That's
don't do it,
exactly
then it
right.
won't happen. And
That's
it's a
exactly right.
mental shift, I think.
It is. It
So
really is. And
best advice I ever.
that is great advice because it's very true. And people, need to understand that. Young authors need to understand that coming into historical fiction. It's very intense, isn't it?
It
Very
is, yeah.
intense.
I think there are
Yes.
genres like literary fiction or anything modern where, yeah, you probably could get away with doing little bits
Hmm.
here and there. And for me, no, I
Yeah.
need my notes. I have notebooks, I have records, I have
Yes.
reference books.
And little sticky notes all over the place.
Oh, don't talk to me about the sticky notes.
Yes. I remember one time I had used index cards and I had them spread across my whole entire floor because I was trying to rearrange some things and so I had all the plot, all of the scenes and everything and it was all across my entire floor. I couldn't even walk. So I
That
understand how
because
that
I think
goes.
that was an attraction for me actually. I'll be honest
Yes,
with you
me
because I'm a bit
too.
of a stationary fiend. I do love my
Yes.
stationery, and I love the idea of having this massive kind of corkboard wall where I could,
Yeah.
stick ideas in it, things like that. the sad reality was that there were just too many. I have to say that then I
Oh,
discovered Scrivener,
yeah.
and I don't know if I don't know if I don't know what you write in, but I'm a Scrivener girl absolutely all the way, and I love my
Mhm.
cork board. I love like, oh, just put a little note there, and that's going to
Yeah.
slot there, and moving it all around and doing all of that. I love it.
Yeah,
So
I think
yeah, cork board.
a lot of authors use Scrivener, so it's definitely one of the ways to go because a lot of authors use it. So plug
Yeah,
out there for Scrivener.
couldn't be without it.
That's
I
right.
actually, funnily enough, what's totally sold it to me was very recently I've been in the process of co-writing a straight historical fiction, not
Oh,
fantasy, historical
okay.
fiction, with a co-author, and we went through so many different ways of working, from bits of Word documents
Mhm.
to a Google document and then back into a Word document.
Yes.
And I mean, now it is a Word document, but we had to split it apart into things and then put it all back together. And I just thought at the time, oh God, why can't you use Scrivener, please?
Yes.
Lesson learned. I've said if we're doing
Yes.
another one, then it's got to be in Scrivener because I
Right.
can't be doing with
Absolutely.
this. It's just
Absolutely. Well, we just did a great commercial for Scrivener, so yeah. Well, so I have to ask you, do you have any like favorite quote that you live by or something that'll tell the readers or listeners about you?
um, that's a very good question, actually. A favorite quote about me. I guess there's no, I can't really. Sorry, I
That's
won't come up
okay.
with some
No, that's
cliche. I really would love to have a cliche thing like there's no try and triumph without trying, or something like
uh,
that. But no, I'm a planner, and I
yeah.
just I'm motivated by what I do. I
That's
think
good
that
though.
is
Hey, that's a good quote. That's you're motivated by what you do. That's a really good quote to live by.
okay. Use that as a soundbite.
Well, can you tell us more about, do you have any, so your books are released. So you said that you were working on some others. So what do the listeners have to expect from you coming up?
So coming up, well, out already is 4 books in the Night Race series, which you have
Right.
very kindly mentioned.
Hmm.
Coming up this autumn, I have hopefully releasing a co-authored book with a lovely lady that can't I
That's
can't
okay.
talk too much more about because
That's okay.
it's not yet public knowledge.
Okay.
I'm thrilled to have been working with her. It was a really exciting and fun experience to co-author, and I would encourage people to try it. There have been lessons that we have both learned from it because it was her
Right.
first experience of co-authoring too. So yeah, it's been great, and I think we're both really proud of the end result. It's currently with the editor right now for
Great.
final kind of run through, and then we'll be able to talk more about that. But yeah, it's hopefully an exciting opportunity for us both to
Oh,
be
that
doing
sounds
this,
great.
and yeah,
Yeah.
it's a bit different. It's a totally different setting from what I'm used to writing. It's World War Two, before,
Oh,
during, and
okay.
after.
Well, that's really
So I've had
popular right now, so you should do
well,
really
I think
well.
there's yeah. Well, we didn't write it for that actually. I think we wrote it because she had an idea for a storyline, and that seemed to fit. So there's a lot of stuff in there about the resistance, the French
Okay.
resistance,
Okay.
which has been kind of my little part of it, I suppose, is
Okay.
contributing a lot of work towards that. And yeah, it fits in very well with her books that she's already published. She's an award-winning writer, so
Oh,
I'm,
great.
I'm really proud
Well,
to be working with her.
we will definitely want to hear back from you so that we can put that on our blog and let everybody
Oh,
know about whenever your release comes
absolutely. Well,
out.
yeah, we've talked about doing a series of interviews
Sure.
together to talk about
Oh, that would be
co-authoring, and
wonderful.
the challenges and the successes and the joys and the
Yeah.
tribulations,
Yeah.
and the end result, of course. So yeah, we'd love to come back and do that, I'm sure.
Sure thing.
So
We
that's
just
coming out. Well, hopefully this autumn that will be out,
okay.
and then probably towards the end of the year or maybe the beginning of next year, I will be releasing the 5th book in the Nat Ray series, which is
Oh,
actually book
exciting.
3 in the sequence,
Uh-huh.
which is it's a different direction for me. It's I'm trying my hand. I've tried my hand at romance, which I found that I sort of enjoyed after a while, because my main series is not really a romance. It's got a main. It's the main characters are a couple. They're an established couple, so they don't have that whole journey, or didn't have that whole journey of, that you'd expect in a romance, that the meet
Right.
cute and getting together, and then they're happily ever. This is their happily ever after. The main series
Okay.
is their happily ever after. Of course, it's not really happily ever after, because that would be too easy. So yeah, because of that, I had to write another prequel, which, because my readers were saying, "Well, how did they get together?" And I thought, "Oh, you're
Yeah.
gonna make me write a romance. You're gonna make me do it." So I did, and I love it. The end result, but oh my god, it was the hardest thing I've ever written in my
Oh,
life.
wow.
It's really tricky. I don't know how romance writers do it. I have so much respect for them now, because I found it
Yeah.
really hard.
Yeah, I could never do that either.
No, I mean, it's not. It's all of my books are sort of clean in that sense, so that wasn't the issue. It was just the whole, that there's a set number of things that you need to have in a romance,
Right.
apparently. So I found that quite difficult. So this latest one that I'm writing is a strange combination, but it isn't so strange when you read it, of murder mystery and horror.
Oh, wow.
Watch this space, because it's going to get quite horrific.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the horror really is an internal horror.
Okay.
And yes, that in the middle of
Psychological.
it there is, yeah, it's a bit more like that.
Okay.
I have a witch character who unfortunately has to go and have her trial. So that's what I'm in the middle of writing right now,
Okay.
which is where my head is at. Is full of witch trials and Maleficus and Maleficarum, and
Uh-huh.
Malleus Maleficarum, and all sorts of
Right.
things like that, which is
Well,
fun.
that's really, really exciting, and we really do appreciate you being on the show today.
Oh, thank you
It's been a
so much
pleasure.
for having me. It's been
And
fun
we're
to chat
really
and talk to you.
absolutely, and we're really super excited for your books, and wish you much success on your new releases coming up this fall and in the first of the year. And as always, for more information on Jan's books, you can go to her website at www.escapeintoatale.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, as next week's episode, we are thrilled to host historical author Helena P. Schrader. Thank you to our listeners and viewers. This is Dee Marley. Keep making history and keep listening.